And now for a closer look at the IMF's growth outlook, we're joined by our global economics analyst, Saruhan Hatipoglu. Thanks for being with us.
Hi, Rachelle.
So, Saruhan, let's start with the positive. What were some of the bright spots in the IMF's outlook?
Well, I think everything was, the sun was shining when the report came in. Look, 75% of the world economy is on an upswing. This year, maybe for the first time, all 45 OECD countries will have positive growth. These are important numbers. And if you look at the stock market overall, we have Dow Jones Global Index up 16% to the year, MSCI up 25%. So it is going well. It is going well because, again, cheap money was available, has been available for developing countries as well. And emerging markets forecast is about 4% range. That's pretty strong too. But look what the IMF is saying. This is the time to actually prepare for the next crisis. We're doing well. Let's get ready. Let's do some structural reform.
Now, we know that the IMF upgraded its growth rates for China on the assumption that it will continue its expansionary policies. How safe is that assumption?
Well, it really depends on the definition of the word safe here. Because if China is doing the old ways of getting to growth, which is expansionary monetary policy, expansionary fiscal policy with the state-owned corporations, then that's not good news. I don't want to see a growth rate of over 7% in China this year and in 2008. There is, however, controlled slowdown. Look, they reduced their required reserve ratio by 50 basis points a couple of days ago. And people were up in arms there. They were saying, look, that's monetary expansion. It is not, because if you read what they're doing, they're actually giving more of this opportunity to banks that are lending to SMEs, not state corporations anymore. So they're doing the right thing. Hopefully, they'll be able to slow down growth, but avoid hard landing. And it looks good now.
Now, being that the IMF is so positive, what would you say are the real economic drivers behind this improving global picture?
That's not a tough one, actually. I was thinking about for emerging markets, but let's start with advanced economies. I think the monetary policy. Let's just admit the central banks had the show going for the longest time. Cheap money available. They have purchased about 3%, overall central banks, developed countries, 3% of the global economic output in government bonds, mortgage bonds, and corporate securities. This is huge. So that's provided a lot of income to a lot of people in the United States. However, this is the type of growth where rich is getting richer, but the income division or equality is becoming a problem. And that's what brought President Trump to the presidency in this country. We're seeing the same thing in emerging markets. We're seeing growth after growth in BRICS, in other emerging markets. But if you look at the picture, Rachelle, intra-growth, there is also a division of inequality, or income inequality is increasing. And that's, again, what IMF is trying to do. Let's stop that before it gets out of hand.
We certainly have seen that theme globally of this issue of people feeling left out of some of the economic gains that we saw. Now, we know that we are about 10 years now since the onset of the global financial crisis. And now the IMF is warning that the global recovery may not last. What would you say are the real trouble spots that are giving them pause?
I think they are very worried about global debt levels. We're talking about $215 trillion overall, 325% of total GDP. That's huge. That's unheard of. If you divide it into emerging markets and developed countries, Rachelle, you see that about 56 trillion of this is in emerging markets. So that one might say, well, that's not that much. That is correct. But the growth rate of this debt in emerging markets has been substantial as compared to the developed markets. And majority of that is in the hands of non-financial corporations. And that is bad news, especially if the US dollar strengthens. Similar things we can say for developed markets. Now things are changing. Central banks are moving away from this. Fiscal policy needs to come in. And fiscal policy does not mean, I'm going to give you the biggest tax break you ever see kind of statement and approach by what we see with President Trump. It has to be responsible, targeted fiscal policy.
Now, some of the other issues that we're seeing that the US and the UK seem to be being held back. What would you say are the main headwinds for those countries?
Well, let's start with the UK. That's an easy one. UK is holding itself back. After the election, things have changed. They need to understand that they lost negotiating power. The consumer confidence is down in the UK. People are not spending as much because of the uncertainty. They need to sit down with the EU and find the solution to the mess that they have created. For the US, I think productivity is the main issue. When you look at productivity numbers, especially in September jobs report, when I see a payroll hourly increase of 2.9% and the productivity is 1.3%, that's simple math of unit labor cost up 1.6%. Businesses are going to shift that money to consumers. They're going to charge more, and interest rates are increasing too. That's not a good